Welcome to The Special Sauce, the podcast that goes inside the minds of recruitment's top 1%. We're your hosts, Chris Pedikis and Lee Jones, the founders of Sorciety, the rec-to-rec agency connecting elite recruiters with elite opportunities. Each week, we sit down with agency recruiters who are billing big numbers annually to uncover what really drives high performance in this industry. It's no fluff, it's no filters, it's just real conversations with the best in the business. Let's get into it.
Today on The Special Sauce, we are joined by Marcus Lynch. Marcus is the founder of the very successful Halcyon Knights, a tech recruitment agency he started with a business partner back in 2007. $1 million biller in his own right, Marcus was able to grow the business and at the same time producing some of the best recruiters and biggest billers in the Aussie recruitment market. In 2019, Halcyon Knights was purchased by ASX-listed business People Infrastructure, which saw Marcus stay in for a few more years as co-CEO. More recently, though, Marcus has founded Zinger, a training platform specifically for recruiters, which we'll touch on a little bit more later in the episode. Marcus Lynch, welcome to The Special Sauce.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lee, and thank you for that kind introduction, that very generous introduction, and thank you, Chris, also for hosting me today.
No, thank you for coming on board.
Mate, we're really excited to have you on the show. I think that there's, I guess, just some of your experience and what you've gone through over the last, 20 odd years in recruitment is a really awesome story. And I think for a lot of recruiters out there, or a lot of agency owners at least, what you've been able to do is something a lot of them, I think, aspire to be able to do as well. So pumped to have you on and dig into it a bit more.
Thank you. Thank you.
Beautiful.
I'm an open book. Go for it, Lee.
Oh, here we go. He's opened himself up here, so who knows?
It's dangerous.
This is very dangerous. So, mate, just a bit of an intro. So, I mean, we've already picked up, or the listeners might have picked up on the accent there. You are an Aussie, grew up in country Victoria around Bendigo, is that right?
I did. I'm one of the few Aussies in the recruitment sector.
There's not many of us.
There's not too many, but I grew up in Bendigo in country Victoria and then moved down to Melbourne as a 17-year-old I was for uni back in 1995.
Yeah, okay.
And so Melbourne has largely been home ever since.
Yep. And in terms of your recruitment career, did you start in the UK?
I did. So, the story goes, so as a 22-year-old with a failed football career behind me, as is every young Aussie's rite of passage, I decided to go and explore the world. And instead of being based in London originally, I decided that I was going to test my charm over the Emerald Isle. So I lived in Dublin for a year. I guess I had the gift of the gab. And so when I was interviewing for job opportunities, it just so transpired that I ended up in a sales job selling these industrial-sized cameras to professional photographers, right? Wow. Yeah, like the most obscure and niche, sales job that you could ever think of, right? So these industrial cameras that would go into production lines, and they were for, commercial photographers that made a living out of taking these really niche photographs for catalogs and magazines and all this sort of stuff. Anyway, so I did that for a year. Do you want to have a guess how many industrial cameras I sold in that 1 year?
I'm going to go one. I reckon you sold one.
Close. I sold three.
Yeah.
Three. Triple.
So it wasn't close.
So I wasn't exactly setting the world on fire, and it was old school, right? This is 2001, and so we had a leaderboard in the offices of this business that I work for in Dublin, and the top performer was on like 75, and then the middle performer was on 35, and then anyway, Lynchy, the Aussie down the bottom, was on 3, and I still was the favourite of the boss. So I think it was because of the accent and all that sort of stuff. But anyway, so failed football career, failed digital camera sales career. Found myself over in London thereafter. Had a lot of friends that were over there and trying to evaluate, well, what do I do next? And of course, back then the visa issues were topical, and they were really hard to get around, to get a permanent paid role as an Aussie without a ability to work for longer than about 6 or 12 months, I think the restrictions were. So was testing my luck at talking to lots and lots of recruiters, and then serendipitously, one of them called back and said, "Hey, we haven't got a job for you, Marcus, but have you ever thought about recruitment?"
We've all been there.
Yeah. We've all been there. That's right. So when people say, did you go looking for a career in recruitment or did you fall into it? I'm very much in the latter category.
Yeah, as are we for I think a pretty similar business that you started with as well. Just before we go into, I guess, the more depth of the recruitment career, we do have to touch on the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
It's important. It's important. Controversial, but important.
Now, for listeners, listeners aren't gonna obviously see this, but for anyone watching the clips on the on YouTube or anywhere else, Marcus is sporting a nice shiner on his left eye. So, mate, what's going on?
Some context, yeah, like that. Address the elephant in the room. Well, Lee, what I would say in response to that is that old blokes shouldn't play sport. That's what it boils down to. So Thursday night, social basketball, just copped a bit of a wayward elbow to the eye. Nothing malicious, and we all shook hands afterwards and made up. But yeah, I look like a bruiser. I look like a brawler. The number of times I've had to say to people, "Hey, look, I'm not a thug. I haven't been involved in a street fight." This comes from a bit of social sport.
And it is legit. Marcus did send me a photo on Thursday night from the basketball stadium saying, "I hope it'll be all right for next week." So maybe we just put that little insert onto the video so people know he's not just trying to get in punch-ons to get exclusive roles or something out there.
Yeah, we'll make a note of it.
That's good.
It's just next level recruitment.
It is.
It's
It
like
is.
Anchorman where they all meet in the back corridor looking for a fight just to get some work.
Yeah, too true.
All good. So, mate, you've started with an agency in London. That was sales recruitment, right?
It was. And it was a baptism of fire, Lee, because this agency that I worked for was just hardcore outbound selling. And so the model was to find good candidates and then just try and find a home for the good candidates through reverse marketing. And I remember all my mates were engineers and accountants and, working in roles. They were getting paid ridiculous hourly rates, and they were able to go out nightclubbing on a Friday evening, and they had all this money, and they'd duck away to Stockholm for the weekend or Paris for the weekend, right? Because it's so easy to get around from London. But in my environment, come Friday evening at 5 o'clock, I was so brain dead from having made 600 outbound calls, which was the core KPI. The core KPI was 600 outbound calls, and of course, I didn't have the street smart enough to know that you could just dial directory assistant 100 times throughout the course of the week to minimise your call quota. I sat there from Monday through to Friday and I made 600 outbound calls talking about a great candidate that I had that had great credentials for your business. Could you be interested in meeting with them? So it was a baptism of fire, and it did shape the reasons why. I did shape the style of business that I later went on to found with Halcyon Knights. But it was a great grounding for me to have a real uncanny lack of fear when it came to picking up the phone and chasing people, which bodes well in recruitment, right?
Yeah, and just take us through that, because I think in this sort of day and age, right, there is that hesitation in the industry around business development. Those early days being sort of thrown to the deep end.
Yeah.
What did that teach you? What did you get out of it?
Well, first things first, Chris, I used to get a lot of fuck offs.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. and then I slowly started to ham up my Aussie accent. In fact, my manager said at the time, "You've got the Aussiest accent of anyone that we've ever hired here." And that, like there's lots of Brits that work in the recruitment sector in Australia, so are there many Aussies that work in the recruitment sector over in the UK. So I really tried to ham up my Aussie accent, hoping that maybe all of these British decision makers on hiring would sort of feel sorry for me, or they'd sort of say, "Oh, I'll give this guy a go. Like, he sounds like a colloquial Aussie, so we'll give him a go." And that didn't work either. But what did it teach me? That was your prompt. Look, it taught me to never fear the no, for one. And then secondly, it also taught me that your best opportunity to engage with somebody comes from talking to them. That's your single greatest opportunity, because as we know, with instant messages or with emails or with text messages or whatever it might be, there's never any feeling, there's never any emotion, and your greatest asset in recruitment is you. Everything about you, your personality, your DNA, everyone's interesting in their own right, and to leave that out of your business development activities is to sell yourself short.
To touch on what you said before about 600 outbound calls, for a lot of people in recruitment now, that's just like, they'd be lucky to make 600 in a year, right? Chris and I came from a business with a similar methodology, which was find a good candidate, reverse market them. For those that perhaps aren't familiar with that reverse marketing or floating, what's kind of what are you normally saying? Like what's the, I guess, basis of a pitch to a prospective client?
Great question, Lee. I can still remember the pitch. Right, I can still remember the pitch, and it went something along this. It's Marcus Lynch calling from X company. How are you? Great. Okay, today I wanted to bring your attention to a meeting I've just come out of, and I have some sensitive information to share with you about this particular individual. And the response from people would be, oh, what's happened? Are my wife and kids okay? Or are my husband and children okay? What have you got to say? And then it would be, no, John. I wanted to share with you that I've just met an unbelievable revenue generator that is working directly within your sector. And then we were challenged to find 3 interest-generating statements about that candidate. Now, I wanted to draw your attention to the fact that this person has an unbelievable track record of sales success in your industry. They've got a brilliant network that they've suggested they can bring to the table if they were to join your business. And they've actually identified your company as a business of interest to them. And so we're always taught to, the anecdote that my manager used to use was, think of yourself as a player agent. Think of yourself as a elite sports talent agent, and you're representing Ronaldo. Now, if you recall, Ronaldo in the early 2000s was just the god of soccer, right? Yeah. He was scoring goals for fun, scoring goals ad nauseum, played for the biggest Galactico clubs throughout Europe, right? So the mindset was, you're an elite player agent, you're representing the Ronaldo of the industry, and you're calling Manchester United, and you're calling AC Milan, and you're calling Barcelona and Real Madrid, and you're saying, hey, are you interested in Ronaldo playing for your club? And that was the mindset that we had. And so it was a real take no prisoners approach, and it was hardcore.
And once again, like, we've done that, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but the aim on that call is to lock them in for an interview. It's not, we're going to send over the resume, blah, blah, blah. It's like, let's lock this guy in now.
Great prompt, Lee, because I remember clearly that there was a playbook, and if you ever deviated outside the playbook, there was punishment, right? And part of the playbook was that you needed to close down the person that you were talking to over that call for an interview. So it was never about providing additional data points. It was never about sending over a CV. And in fact, I remember one time I just couldn't close this guy, but I was that confident when talking to a hiring manager that I had a great candidate for their business. I was that confident, but I couldn't close them on the spot right on that call. And so I thought, I'll just cheat here a little bit, and in fact, it was fax back in the day, right? There was no email, right? So I faxed over a CV. Anyway.
Mate, even I missed the fax.
You missed the fax. This is going back. Anyway, if you recall, faxes used to actually print a receipt that it had been successful, and it'd print the first part of the first page. And so my manager was going past the fax machine and bloody saw the receipt, right? And he's like, hey, Lynchy, right? And he threw something at me, and he used every expletive under the sun to call out the fact that I'd cheated and gone outside the playbook, right? And I remember I had to wear a sign over my head that said, I'm the CV sending fella. Who needs a Stella? And I had to shout the entire team a beer on Friday night. You know, I was earning 4 fists of fuck all, right? So for me to shout the entire office of about 20 recruiters on a Friday put a real dent in my desire to go to Paris for the weekend, right? Like all my mates. But yeah, it was hardcore, and it taught me great sales reflexes. And it taught me, as I said earlier, Chris, it taught me that the best way to insert the best of yourself into an interaction from a business development perspective is to talk to people.
I think on the back of that as well, it's just the volume that you're doing, right? And I know in this day and age, it may not be, I don't think there's any agencies that are doing that, but I think what it's taught us as well is you get better faster, because you make those mistakes that you need to make to learn over time. You make them within 2-3 months as opposed to 2-3 years.
Yeah, I love that, because I always said at Halcyon Knights, and I know we'll get onto that, but I always said that the mastery comes from doing. And so the longer that you're not doing something, right, the more likely you are to drift, and the more likely your skills are to drift and just go through the motions, and you never quite master it. So the mastery comes from doing, and you're quite right. Like, you know, it was a fail or succeed fast environment. That's what it was. And yeah, I tell you what, I learned what a good week's work looked like, or what a good day's work looked like very, very quickly. Like, I learned that you can get a lot done, and I developed this laser focus to ensure that every day was a productive day. And I think I think what I've witnessed over the last 20 odd years in this sector is that consultants have some consultants have a different interpretation around what a great day's work looks like what a great day's input actually looks like. Because, if the ceiling's here in your mind, you can challenge it. That's one thing that I say in Zinger, I know we'll get onto that later, is redefine what you think a great day's work looks like. Because you got another level. It's like, I love footy, right? I'm a passionate footy supporter. Ben Cousins always used to say, like, he was the finest exponent of gut running, right? And he would always used to say that when he thought he couldn't push anymore, he'd just challenge himself to find more reserves to go to a next level. Now, I'm being a bit dramatic, but the same applies in recruitment, right? If you think the ceiling's there on your day's inputs, challenge yourself to go to the next level.
Yeah, I think when we caught up a couple of weeks ago, we spoke about that I think, and I know I'm guilty of it a lot of the times, in recruitment, we can get busy being busy. And I think back to, Chris and I working in an environment similar to what you had, right? And you think, well, how do you get anything done when you're pumping out that kind of volume every day? Yeah. The reality is we didn't have the distractions of, we only used the landline, right? Like, this is really showing our age here. Yeah. And this is easily, probably coming off like an old bloke telling young people what to do here.
Yeah.
I am. But, there was no distractions with LinkedIn, right? Like, we're making lists out of the yellow pages. There wasn't a mobile phone with all the different apps that you were scrolling through every day. It was like landline, CRM maybe. Like, I think half the time it was a spreadsheet anyway. So you could just focus on getting stuff done. And I think you spoke about the other day about, not being busy for the sake of being busy.
Yeah, and I think with the acceleration of tools and resources that we have, the sweet spot these days is the combination of both, using the tools to their greatest ability, so choosing not to be distracted by that, but then challenging yourself to find another gear in terms of your daily inputs and your daily outputs.
Yeah, good stuff. So I just want to kind of fast forward a little bit here, just firstly to talk about Halcyon Knights before we go into the detail, because I think it's really important for the audience to understand that, you've come back from the UK, you've spent some time in recruitment again back in Oz, and then you've decided to start the business. And then we fast forward to 2019, so 12 years after starting the business.
Yep.
And the business gets acquired. And I'll just read out some of the numbers here. Hopefully you don't mind. I mean, this information is public knowledge. You can find it on the internet. Maybe these numbers are right, maybe they're not. Who knows? But a $13.5 million purchase price with an $8.2 million earnout after a couple of years as well. So, as I mentioned at the start of the business, at the start of the session, that's where a lot of agencies want to be. And I don't know, from my perspective, to get a business from start up to sell in the space of 12 years for what seems to be some pretty good money, great result.
Yeah, thank you, Lee. Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. When I started Halcyon Knights back in 2007...
Was that the vision?
I decided... Well, was it the vision? Yeah. Look, I don't think so.
Yeah.
No, I don't think it was the vision. Like, I didn't think at that point in time that there was a market for M&A in the recruitment sector. I didn't know about it, to be honest. Yep. But the vision was to create a business that was more customer focused. So if you think about my grounding, my foundation in the sector, it was all about placing the candidate as the center of your universe. Like, it was all about the candidate. Find the great candidates and you'll find them a home. That was the mantra of the business that I had worked for previously in my introduction to recruitment. And I kept thinking, well, the candidate's not paying the bills, right? So shouldn't we be more client focused, and shouldn't the client be the center of our universe? Now, it seems obvious by today's standards that is the case. Clearly, both are stakeholders in getting the deal done, right, in recruitment, right? And you rely upon both party, right, to be aligned in order for there to be a transaction and a transaction to happen. But I flipped the model from the environment that I came from, and that was the genesis of Halcyon Knights. So the vision was to become a really client-focused organisation, and starting in out on 1 Queen's Road in Melbourne, right? Yeah, St Kilda Road Towers. I don't think it's called St Kilda Road Towers anymore.
I know the building you're talking about, though.
Yeah, you know the one?
Yeah.
One of the D building. And we loved it because it had a glass lift, right, on the outside. And, I remember Lincoln and I starting that business back in 2007 thinking that, gee, you know, we're sort of moving and shaking like billionaires now because we've got, you know, we look out over Albert Park and it came alive for the Grand Prix, as you can imagine, and all that sort of stuff. But anyway, we liked the building because of the glass lift on the outside. But we had an office, fair dinkum, you couldn't swing a cat in the office, right? And in actual fact, there was 2 partitions, and the office where both Lincoln and my desk was located was behind the front partition or the entry partition where we would meet candidates. So regularly Lincoln would be sitting there meeting with a candidate, and I'd just open the door and say, excuse me, I've got a duck bus. So there was no independence ever. It was we were right on top of one another. But you couldn't swing a cat in that office, and that's where we started and refined our craft at Halcyon Knights. The vision wasn't to build a business that could be acquired, but the vision was to build big. And so Lincoln and I challenged one another back and forth for a period, right, over the first 15, 16 odd months of our business before we had really good momentum and we decided, hey, we're ready to start hiring people. Let's start scaling this business. And so that was about mid-2018 2008. That was mid-2008. Do you remember what happened?
Good old GFC.
That's when I started my career. About 6 months. Yeah.
I started 2007.
Yeah. Started 2008.
So we were 5 people at this point in time, right? 5. And we thought, hey, you know, we're starting to build something big here. And lo and behold, the GFC hit, hiring fell off a cliff. And our biggest cost in our business was, of course, our wages. So very, very soon we retreated back to Lincoln and myself and had to find some inner reserves like the gut running from Ben Cousins to go again.
And just on that, I mean, early days, like what kind of numbers personally were you putting up from a billings point of view?
You want to know literally the sorts of numbers that Lincoln and I were billing?
Go on. Give as much detail as you want to give, that you can remember a while ago now.
Yeah. Well, I do remember. I remember most years what I billed, including when I first started at that agency over in Mother England. Early days at Halcyon Knights, we were putting up about 600 grand each. Yeah, Lincoln and I. Yep.
And look, that's good numbers. I mean, you got to remember that's, you know, best part of 15, 16 years ago.
Yeah.
I
Different
mean,
salaries, right? Salaries were a lot
salaries were
lower.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah. And
Fees were
I reckon fees were sharper. I reckon there was an expectation that fees were sharper back then. I think businesses have now seen the value of having external third-party recruitment firms that bleed for them, that really work hard for them, and they recognise the value of that more so today perhaps than what they did back then. So fees were sharper, salaries were smaller, and that influenced the unit price of our deals. Right. Yeah, so those numbers were good. But we were churning it out. You know, we were 7:30 a.m. starts, we were 7:30 p.m. finishes. You know, we were working on weekends. And, you know, a lot of this was before LinkedIn became the global phenomenon that it is these days, where candidates and clients and recruiters live. So we were doing it the old-fashioned way. And I think, you know, as I said earlier, with the acceleration of tools being available nowadays, there's real operational efficiencies that you can harness that wouldn't mean you need to do the 12-hour days that we were doing back in the day. Yeah.
And I remember, like, you know, some of the numbers you told us that you were putting out personally over the following years were like big numbers. So, you know, you're pumping out huge numbers yourself, young family, running a business that, you know, 25, 30 people. That's a lot of work. So like talk to us more about your methodology or your way of working in particular. Like what is it that you did or do to enable or to, you know, let you get those results basically?
Yeah. So from 2010, we started to rebuild the business. And then by the middle part of that decade, you quite rightly, we had around 25, 30 staff in our business. And so how did we get it to there and how was I able to combine being hands-on with a family and all these sorts of things? The first thing that I would say is that I was always hands-on. I always believed that for your staff to believe in you, they had to know that you were good at their role, the role that they're doing. So myself and my business partner, Lincoln, we were very, very focused on role modelling the behaviours that we expected from our team. And so that meant that I was prolific in doing the job that I then expected them to do. And that enabled me to give advice and to provide tutelage from a position of knowing that I was good at their craft. So that was the first thing. I was always role modelling the behaviours that I expected from the team. And so how did I do that? I use a lot of footy analogies, Chris, as you've probably picked up on.
Yeah.
I was forever getting front and centre to contests, right? So I used to say to my team, you've got to get to a lot of contests. And I've later refined that to be not so footy related. You've got to get in the traffic, right? You've got to get yourself involved in the game somehow. And that means being highly visible, means getting out and visiting your customers, and not just a one-off, like, because relationships aren't built with a transactional meet and greet. Like one, what they say in cricket, one innings doesn't make the summer, right? You can't just expect to meet somebody and instantly create a unbreakable bond that lasts you a lifetime. Building relationships comes through repeated proximity, repeated catch-ups, ongoing get-togethers and nurturing the relationships that you build. So I was always front and centre. I was always highly visible. And then I always challenged, as I said earlier, I always challenged the status quo on what a good amount of workload is. I always thought, okay, if everybody's prescribing, hey, you can't manage more than 10 jobs on your desk at any one point in time, I would actually say, why not? Why can't you? Why can't you manage 15? And then, the purists would say, oh, well, you compromise on quality and then, you're not giving everyone your due attention. Well, you are if you're laser focused. And then the final thing that I did really effectively was I remained focused through that period of time. And I did that through blocking out time. That was my secret sauce, pardon the pun. That was my secret sauce at Halcyon Knights. I was able to be very, very focused over shorter sprints on specific groups of activities, and that enabled me to cover lots and lots of ground. I'm not a big believer in multitasking, so a lot of busy fools that you talk about earlier, they do bits and pieces of lots of things poorly. I used to single task ruthlessly, so I'd focus on a cohort or a group of activities for a block, and then at the end of that block of time, I'd move on to another group of activities that are the same group of activities for that period of time.
Take us through, Marcus, obviously your time management for the week, right? Lots of roles, like everyone, limited hours. How did you, block out your time? Take us through for our listeners.
Those who have worked at Halcyon Knights, Chris, will know about the pendulum analogy that I always used to pontificate, right? I always used to talk about the fact that in recruitment, right, your time, the best use of your time is either in generating momentum, and within that comes activities like FaceTime with clients, your outreach. So what conversation levers are you using to generate dialogue with potential fee-paying customers? So let's broadly say that's generating momentum. And then on the other side of the equation, you're sourcing candidates, because from generating momentum, you're also getting access to job briefs. And then, of course, there's no use having 100 job briefs if you're not putting candidates forward to those job briefs, right? And the two of those activities combined is where the majority of your time in recruitment should be. So what I always used to say to staff at Halcyon Knights is that you have 10 power blocks over the course of a week. You have an AM and a PM on a Monday, and on a Tuesday, and on a Wednesday, and on a Thursday. So you have 10 power blocks over the course of the week. Now, depending on where your pipeline is at in terms of job count, part of your week is either focused on generating momentum or candidate sourcing. Now, how much is dependent upon one or the other will depend upon how many green jobs you're carrying at a point in time. So let's just illustrate the point. If you're carrying 7 green jobs and your capacity is 10, then 70% of your time is invested in candidate sourcing and 30% of your time is invested in generating momentum. And it's a simple, fail-safe way to self-regulate your workload over the course of the week and avoid being that colloquial busy fool, of which there are many in the recruitment sector. Everybody's working, everybody's having a crack. There's no doubt about that. I never ever found that any of my staff weren't putting in, although I always challenge them to find that extra level, that next gear. But at the same time, they need to be investing in the right pursuits based upon the status of their pipeline. Does that make sense?
I love that. I love the simplicity of it.
Yeah.
Right? That you're not overcomplicating, the working week, right? People know exactly what they need to do at exactly what certain time.
And it's so dynamic, Chris, to your point, because today you've got 7 green jobs on your desk, but then tomorrow 2 fall away. You might have filled one, or indeed one, the headcount might be frozen. So then all of a sudden you're back to a 50-50 split over the working week. You've got an AM and you've got a PM. So 7 slots on candidate sourcing, 3 slots on generating momentum, or vice versa, depending upon the state of your pipeline at a given point in time. And if you're militant on that, then you're always playing both sides of the equation on the mission critical activities that get deals done.
Perfect. Talk to us about green jobs, because I think we talked about it off air and I loved it. And I think a lot of times, people work jobs for the sake of working a job, right? What's a green job in your world?
So at Halcyon Knights, I coined the phrase green jobs, amber jobs, and red jobs. And the first thing I'd like to declare is that you can get a deal done on any of those jobs. But I always used to talk about playing the odds. And one of the habits of really, really elite recruiters that I saw is that they continuously played the odds. I can talk more about that later. But insofar as it pertains to red, amber, or green jobs, a green job is a job that gives you the greatest likelihood of getting a result. And why is that? Because a green job is with a client that you've met with. So you've actually created rapport through FaceTime. And hopefully you've met with on more than one occasion. Now, hopefully you've met with more than one hiring stakeholder on that particular process. So it might be a head of TA, it might be a head of the line of business that's most relevant to your agency, it might be a head of HR. So you're really firmly engaged. That was the first criteria. Secondly, you've got terms agreed, so there's no ambiguity, there's no surprises. In recruitment, your clients hate surprises, so you've got terms agreed. Thirdly, you've got a clearly defined job spec. For me, it was more than just, we're looking for this type of person. If you happen to find them, we'd be happy to hire them. I always used to seek commitment from the client with an official job description. To me, that validates that the job is real. And so based on that criteria, now you're starting to evaluate, is this a green job? An amber job can still get a deal done, but you might be missing one of those ingredients. And the reason that it gets graded amber is that you would deprioritise the sourcing on that job compared to a green job. And now you're starting to rationalise in your time, not being a busy fool, because you're starting to develop a priority list which helps you play the odds and be better at your craft. A red job might be a job that you feel like you've got covered based upon a shortlist. You feel like it might be hanging on based upon the pipeline and candidates that is currently in play for that job that might be outside of your control if you don't have an exclusive, or indeed it might be a job that more than one of those criteria is not being met, and then you can really deprioritise that one. You might still find yourself putting forward candidates, picking low-hanging fruit. There might be some candidates in the room that might be suitable for that job. Doesn't mean that you can't bounce them over to the client, but you've just got to treat them differently. And I remember Mick Malthouse, the great coach at Collingwood, when Alan Didak and Chris Tarrant, and then there was some reserves player playing for Collingwood, they got caught on a night out in the lead into a final. Right?
I remember that.
Do you remember it? Yeah. And so all of the media was in hysterics saying, well, Mick, you've got to suspend all 3 of these players. And Mick took a deep breath and said, I'm not going to suspend, I think it was Chris Tarrant, but don't quote me on that. It was certainly Alan Didak. I'm not going to suspend Tarrant and Didak because they are A-grade players in this team. So taking them out weakens our possibilities on Saturday evening in this big final that's coming up. But the third player, whose name escapes me, we are going to suspend that person because he's not at the same level as Didak and Tarrant. And he said this, he said it poetically. He said, there's nothing so unequal as the equal treatment of unequals. And it's same in recruitment. You can't just go like a bat out of hell on a amber job or on a red job because you're neglecting the focus that is required on those green jobs.
Yeah. And that's what you said before. That's about playing the odds, right? Like put your time and effort into where you got the most likelihood of doing a deal.
100%, Lee. Got to put your time and effort into the areas that give you the greatest possibility of getting the deals done. That is playing the odds.
Yeah.
Yep.
There was something else you spoke about earlier that part of, I guess, your success, and from the sounds of it, what you imparted on the people that were in the business was about getting in the contest and being visible, right? So when you talk about getting out in front of clients, for you, are you the kind of guy that's just, is it let's do coffees, lunches, breakfast, events, networking things, industry events? Like what was your kind of specialty, if you want to call it that?
All of those things is the answer. That's the simple answer. The more that you put yourself in the line of sight of your clients, the more likely the scenario where the narrative flips, and instead of you, the recruiter, wanting to bring these people into your network, the more they start looking at you and saying, hey, Lee's everywhere. Maybe I should be investing in him. Maybe I should be adding him into my network. So the more visible you are at all of those events, the greater the likelihood of you flipping the narrative, and all of a sudden you're the coveted one in their networks, as opposed to you building it the other way all the time. But coffees are great. You know, in my lifetime in recruitment, the whole casualisation of business has occurred, so much so that there doesn't need to be any officialdom to the way that you're catching up with people. Just coffee. Coffees are great. You know, a beer here or there. But what I used to say to my staff is, any opportunity to get FaceTime with your clients, take it. So it might be presenting a shortlist. You know, it's easy to send an email and forget about it, right? But the more courageous thing to do, and the thing that actually endears you to that client for a longer period of time, over more time, so it becomes more sustainable, is for you to actually go out to their office and present the shortlist in person. So there's an opportunity. Getting feedback on candidates that have interviewed, there's an opportunity to do it in person. So do it in person. Now, where you can't do it in person, do it over a video call. You know, not quite as good, but still better than a phone call, still better than purely email.
And I think you're right. You know, that sort of managing a process, right? That's 4 or 5 times where you're in front of them, managing one particular role. So yeah, you times that over by 3-4 roles a year, you've caught up with them 15, 20 times.
100%. And then you're building a relationship that'll survive the test of time. Yeah. And it's a real statement of intent. It shows that you're invested in your client.
Yeah. You obviously were a prolific biller, but I know, you know, even over the years competing against consultants from Halcyon Knights, that there were some really good ones, you know, out there, right? And that are still in market now, pumping out huge numbers. I guess what I wanted to know from you, besides obviously fantastic leadership they had to get them there,
Yeah.
what kind of common traits or characteristics have you seen over the years in big billers? Is there anything that you've any trends that you've seen?
There are, but the first disclaimer that I would share with you is that in my lifetime, I've never seen that elite billers have this one magical otherworldly characteristic which sets them apart from all other contenders in the game, right? I've never seen that they've got this one single characteristic which makes them, it's like this magical, you know, panacea that makes them just elite in what they do. What I've observed is that elite billers do lots and lots and lots of things that are inherent in recruitment. You're spinning lots of plates. They do all of those things just a little bit better than the next person. So that's my broad level response to your question. What are the specific things that they do more than others? The first thing is that they are not busy fools, because they're able to really critically evaluate where their pipeline is at, and then that shapes where they're putting their time, either generating momentum or candidate sourcing. So I know this sounds a little repetitive, but that is something that they do particularly well. The second thing is that they're highly visible. So they're out in the traffic and they're not just one shot, one kill with their approach. So they're building their profile more holistically across their clients and across new prospects as well. And they're doing that through repeated face time with their clients and repeated interactions with their clients. So they're highly visible. They put themselves in their client's line of sight to ensure that they're that person that their clients want in their network, as opposed to the other way around. And then finally, they just continually play the odds. And I'll give you an example of playing the odds. A solid recruiter banks that they're going to get a deal done when they've got a client that is really keen on a candidate and a candidate that is really keen on a client that is midway through a process, and they tools down on that particular process. But they're not understanding that there's so many variables in recruitment that can conspire against them, right? You know, the candidate gets a counter offer. That's an obvious one, right? And they decide, hey, I don't really hate where I'm at, so rather than change it, I've got another 20 grand in the back pocket, I'm going to be happy with that. So that's the first likely scenario that can happen, or possible scenario that can happen in recruitment. The second thing is they might just love their barista that is on their normal commute to work. They might love going to their barista because their barista knows their coffee order. And so they say, hey, Chris, I know you'll have a 3/4 almond latte. It's ready to go. So when you go into that coffee shop, Chris, you know that your 3/4 almond latte is ready to go. And the prospect of them having to find a new barista, right, that knows their order and they might not like as much and the barista might not like them as much is just so abhorrent that they can't actually bring themselves to make a change. So they revert back to going with their existing job that they already work in, or indeed a similar commute for another job that doesn't change their barista. There's a million things that can happen. Counter offers, change of baristas, headcount gets pulled. At the final furlong, a senior manager says, no, I don't like the cut of the candidate's jib, so we're not moving forward. An elite recruiter understands this. They understand that they're trying to play the odds always. And so therefore they don't stop sourcing candidates for that role until the deal is done. So that's the difference. Elite performers are always playing the odds.
I like that. And that's the thing. I mean, I don't know what it would be, but it's reducing risk. And if you look at, what's considered a good fill rate, let's say on perm at one agency to the other, it's slightly different. But I know there's probably a lot of agencies out there where, they're probably happy with 40 or 50%, right? Now at 40%, you're losing more than you win.
Yep. It's a really good point. And I love that reference to removing risk, because the elite recruiters that I've seen in my lifetime, and particularly at Halcyon Knights, they build resilience into their pipeline, and they do that by playing the odds. So they build their network bigger. They build it deeper. That's building resilience into your pipeline. That's playing the odds. They don't stop sourcing on a brief until they have a deal done, because that's building resilience into their pipeline. Average recruiters fear sourcing candidates only for a candidate that's already involved in the process to get the job, and then having to reveal to the new candidate into the mix, hey, sorry, we didn't get off first base. But an elite recruiter is able to say, look, I want to have you ready to go for this role. I want you to know there's other candidates that are progressing, so it may not go anywhere. But if it's not this one, it's something else that I've got you earmarked for. And that becomes a habit that they build into the way that they work. All the time, they're building resilience into their pipeline and into their business, within a business, into their pipeline, into their desk, into, call it what you will.
Yeah. It's that transparency and honesty, right? That helps them build a relationship with candidates and trust ultimately, right? That's saying, hey, you know what? I'm not looking now, or this one wasn't quite right, but in 3 months, in 6 months, that role's going to pop up. That's right for them, right?
It's a great characteristic of elite recruiters that manage expectations both ways. So how do you turn a red job or an amber job into a green job? You qualify, you manage expectations, and sometimes vice versa. You might hear some uncomfortable truths from a client by really qualifying hard, and that takes courage to be able to say, hey, I'm going to call it, Mr. or Mrs. Client, I don't think that this is a priority for your business right now. Let's not fear the response from the client being, actually, Chris, you're right. Let's just shelve it for another couple of months, because the alternative is that you're a busy fool and you're off sourcing and you think you're building pipeline, but you're really building false pipeline because you haven't had the courage to manage expectations through transparency and through qualifying hard.
Yeah. And you're just wasting time, right? Like we've spoken so much, say, about, utilising time effectively, and you got to manage that. Yeah. Mate, you've given us some really good stuff there. I think that's a really good segue into, I guess, what you're doing now. I can see the T-shirt there, Zinger. So tell us, in your own words, tell us more about Zinger and what you're doing now.
So when I finished up at Halcyon Knights, I had a go at a really amazing construction fintech company that is still going. I'm no longer actively involved, but I'm still an investor in that particular business. I really love the purpose of that organisation. Startup is hard, but that's certainly an organisation that I really believed in, and I went in there to provide some go-to-market advice, so some sales advice basically on how they were able to generate some momentum. So I did that for a period, and then once I finished up there and was a free agent, I had several recruitment agencies that contacted me about the possibility of leading their business, and that was flattering. But at that point in time, I decided that wasn't what I wanted to do. I'd had my experience at Halcyon Knights and I'd built a large business and a successful business, and now I wanted a new challenge. But when I reflected upon why those businesses were interested in me, I guess it was because one thing that we're able to do really successfully at Halcyon Knights was we're able to get people going quickly. And we're able to do that, not always, but we're able to do that over time because we simplified our entire L&D and onboarding experience for new hires at Halcyon Knights. And we stripped it back to being very much about bite-sized learning opportunities for our staff. And so I've created a business called Zinger, which is the digitisation of that whole mentality or that whole mindset that I pioneered at Halcyon Knights that proved over time to be able to get people going quickly. And the essence of Zinger is this. What I witnessed at Halcyon Knights over the 16-odd years that I was running that business is that people learn differently in the modern world. All right. Once upon a time, people could sit through hours on end of me talking at the front of a boardroom about best practices for recruitment. And this is how you do this. And I'd have Gantt charts and I'd have flow charts and we'd have pictures and role plays and we'd go back and forth. But fundamentally, we'd spend a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks in the boardroom with me talking and some interaction back and forth. But people don't learn that way nowadays. And what I witnessed over my lifetime at Halcyon Knights is slowly the glaze started to set in on the staff in the boardroom, right? And, slowly the mobile phones started to make their way into the boardroom and the distractions that you spoke about earlier, Lee, in the modern world became far more prevalent. And so something had to change at Halcyon Knights. It couldn't be about long blocks of learning that what it created was cognitive overload. It created an environment where it went in one ear and out the other because it was too much. It was overwhelming. And I used to say, I turned to my business partner at a point in time and I said, look, I feel like we're teaching toddlers how to parallel park here. There's no use teaching rookie consultants or, emerging consultants about how to sell retainers if they haven't mastered the basics. And so we stripped it all back to a Zinger-led approach to L&D and onboarding at Halcyon Knights, hence the name of the business, Zinger. And so, as I said, this is the digitisation of that mentality and that mindset that created a lot of high performers at Halcyon Knights. The essence of Zinger is this. Through video and quiz content, right, we're able to make learning and onboarding in the recruitment sector fun. So the video content's jovial. It's written by me, it's developed by me, so it couldn't be anything but. It's fun, it's engaging, it's a bit jovial, right? And that's designed to engage recruiters. The next thing is it's digestible. So the video content is only between 3 and about 8 minutes in duration, each video over the learning journey. So it's not war and peace. You don't need to allocate learning blocks to it. It's designed to be consumed on the fly around a busy schedule of a recruiter on your way to work, when you're out walking the dog, when you're doing yoga in the evening, if that's not distracting your mindfulness. But it's designed to be consumed on the fly. It's easy to understand, so the themes are simple. So there's nothing incognito about what's being prescribed in the lesson content. And then next, it's also easy to apply. So once you understand what is being prescribed here by the video content, then it's easy to put into action. And I love what you said earlier about mastery comes from doing, Chris, because that's the whole ideology of Zinger. Zinger is about providing anchor themes to your team that gives them the confidence to do. And through doing, they get great. And so that's what this is all about. And I'm passionate about it and I'm loving the journey that I'm on, and I've got some wonderful clients that are getting on board and they're loving the approach and they're seeing that it's adjusting the behaviours of their team.
Well, I think from from the time we've spent with you, we certainly see that you've got a lot to offer. I think that the consultants that are out there, but just the industry in general, mate. And I think in terms of spending time with you today, we've loved it. I think you've given some really good insights for a lot of our listeners. And I'd encourage anyone that listens to this to reach out to you to learn more about Zinger and try and get it into the business as quick as they can and help your consultants be big billers, because you've got a pretty good track record of producing them, mate.
Thanks, Lee.
Thanks for coming on.
No, it's my pleasure. Thank you, Chris.
No, thank you. Yeah. Before we do let you go, though.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
One final question.
Okay, this is good. What's my favourite colour for the front bar?
Yeah.
My favourite vegetable?
No, it's black and white for a Collingwood supporter.
Yeah, black and white.
That's right.
Bit nervous about the finals, but going back, if you could go back to yourself 20s, what advice would you give, I guess, to your younger self or any call it, junior recruiters in the first couple of years in the sector?
I love that. That's a great question. What advice would I give myself or anyone just entering the sector? What I would say is learning does happen through osmosis. There's no doubt about it. It happens through doing. You get great through doing, and you absorb what's happening around you, right? In recruitment in particular, right? So anyone who's entering the sector, or what I would say to my 24-year-old self, I think I was when I started in recruitment, is and this isn't revolutionary, this advice, because you hear it in elite sporting environments, you hear it in the corporate world all the time. Go and align yourself to somebody who's doing unbelievably well. Shadow them, be shadowed by them, ask them to mentor you, ask for time one-on-one with them, once a week or once a fortnight. And if you don't know those people, if they're not in your immediate business or in your immediate vicinity, go and find out who they are and get on the front foot and ask to have time with them, because that's the quickest way to getting great at this sector. And what a wonderful sector it is. It's lucrative. It's so rewarding. There's never a day that is exactly the same. Every challenge is a prototype. There's common themes across the board, but every scenario is a prototype. The objections you get today, you've never heard of, right? The objections you get tomorrow will be a new one as well. So what a wonderful sector, what a wonderfully enriching sector. And that's the best way to get good at this craft.
No, I love that. And I'm sure our guests, our listeners rather, listening to it will love it as well. Thank you again, Marcus, for coming on board.
Good on you, Chris. Good man. Nice one. Good on you, Lee.
Cheers.
That's a wrap for this episode of The Special Sauce. We hope that you're walking away with some insights that you can actually use every day on your desk. If you enjoyed the conversation, follow, like, subscribe, or leave a review so we can reach more recruiters just like you. For more about Sorciety, check out our website on society.com or follow us on LinkedIn. Thanks for listening, and see you next time on The Special Sauce.